Hey, what is up, mortals? It is me, Dylan, here with a new video for you. Welcome to part 16 of My Hero Academia meets Solo Leveling. I just wanted to greet you guys by just saying, sit back and relax. You're in for a treat. So, we begin. The night was lit up by an azure light, but its source was not pleasant. With just one look, one could see that it all came from the forest, a blue hell on earth. The flames were consuming everything in sight, and Koda was scared. He could see everything from his hiding spot, but he didn't know what was happening. He kept asking himself how Mandalay was doing and what he should do. Should he stay where he was and hope that nothing bad happens? Or should he run back to camp immediately? All of these things went through his head at once. But he didn't get to decide on time. Out of nowhere, a man, clad in a dark cloak, leaped at him with an arm wound back. Even if he could see it coming, Koda wouldn't have been able to dodge it. But he didn't need to. Just as suddenly as the figure had appeared, something else happened. The boy was pushed out of harm's way. Koda was now shocked and confused as he looked around himself, only to realize that he hadn't been pushed. Standing next to him was a knight-like figure, so dark that it looked as if it was made out of shadows. Wherever it had come from, it had dragged the boy away, and was there to protect him. Koda remained shocked, wanting to ask where the knight had come from. But he didn't get to do that. The dark figure was alone, and therefore didn't know if it could take on the cloaked stranger. It wasn't willing to stay and find out either, so it acted quickly by picking the little boy up and running for the woods. The knight went full speed, carried a cool aura, and was as silent as the night itself. It was so mysterious and didn't say a word, but Koda wasn't afraid of it. Despite everything he didn't know about the shadow, it had just saved him. So to him, its presence was nothing but comforting. Meanwhile, Izuku and Igris had arrived at his destination. Earlier they had caught the presence of something powerful and had traced it to this location, an empty clearing in the woods. The greenette was confused that he didn't immediately see what he was looking for. But he didn't let that stop him. He ordered Kaizo to land at the edge of this clearing, just to make sure that they couldn't be ambushed as easily, before setting his feet back on the earth. He then looked around the area, trying to find the source of that aura, but for some reason, he couldn't find it now. Igris was just behind his master, trying to do the same, but he also came out empty-handed. That is when they both sensed something. It wasn't nearly as strong as what they had felt before, meaning that it wasn't the same person, but they still recognized it somewhat. They both looked at each other, still not saying a word, before turning towards the hidden presence and saying, "I know you're there! Come out already, or you'll have to deal with a hungry dragon!" Loud enough so that whoever was there would hear him. There was a moment of silence at first, until they heard movement from behind the tree line. That's when an unexpected face revealed itself. "Calm down. I have no intention of becoming lunch to some overgrown lizard," he said, right as he stepped into the clearing with his hands in the air. It was Shigaraki, followed by Kurogiri. This revelation shocked Izuku a little, but it also made him shiver. If Shigaraki was here, in the exact spot where he had previously felt an immensely powerful aura, it meant that he now had confirmation on who that had been. It was the monarch of destruction. Either he or something of his creation had just been there. He knew that it wasn't Shigaraki himself, for it didn't show any signs now or during any previous encounter. So the question is, what are they up to? "Looks like my master was right after all," the hand-covered villain then said, breaking Izuku out of his thoughts. The greenette looked puzzled at first, until Shigaraki continued. "He knew that you would take the bait." Now it clicked in Izuku's mind. The thing that they were up to They were luring him out here. This alarmed him, of course, for it all but confirmed that this was an ambush of some sort.
Relax. I'm not here to attack you. I came here to talk,
Shigaraki then said, his voice sounding just as sadistic as it always did. This didn't put Izuku at ease, but he hid it as best as he could before saying, "Then talk!" quite aggressively. The villain noticed the brunette's aggression, but wasn't at all intimidated. It actually amused him to a certain extent, but he didn't waste any time before saying,
"Last time we met, you made it clear that you would join the League if it benefited you in any way. So I'm here with a new offer. Join us. And in return, we will leave all Yue brats be. Except for one, that is."
With the same voice as before. Izuku was in shock now, for he didn't know how to properly react. Realistically, this offer should be worthless, for it doesn't provide him with any special resource or privilege. But the circumstances have changed. Right now, he is convinced that Nezu has started to work against him, which means that he can't stick around at UA anymore. This means that he has nowhere to go, so an invitation to the League would benefit him in this scenario. If that was what he actually was thinking. The truth is that no matter how much he tried to reason within his own brain about the benefits, it was never the thing that convinced him. What convinced him was the part about letting his classmates be. All the previous reasoning was nothing but a cover, so that he couldn't be accused of actually caring for his classmates. The only thing about this that was concerning, that Shigaraki's master was in on it. He helped to arrange this, which means that he probably has something planned. Izuku had to think about this for a short while, until something else came to his mind.
"Did you do all of this just to get my attention? Or are you up to something else?"
he asked, sounding calm and cold as he did. Shigaraki looked confused, as if he had forgotten something, until he remembered what it was and said,
"Yes and no. I fully intended for us to have this conversation all the time, but I couldn't be sure of its outcome. If you were to accept my deal, I would call the attack off immediately. If you were to decline, the goal would be to kidnap that Bakugo brat."
Izuku looked a little shocked at first, as if he really wasn't expecting this response, until he started chuckling. Shigaraki was of course confused by this, for it broke the brunette's usual cold character. He was about to ask about it, until Izuku said,
"So the one you're after happens to be the only one that I don't care about. That's funny."
Before continuing to chuckle, Shigaraki was a little frozen after hearing this. It did happen to benefit him and his goals, but it made him feel uneasy. This is the first time he has seen Izuku be anything but cold and serious, so to say that it was off-putting was an understatement. Izuku continued to laugh after a while, for it was a little too funny for him. He did manage to calm down eventually, before thinking and saying,
"I have something that I need to do. Call your men off now. I'll return here with my answer shortly."
Before turning his back, Shigaraki was confused by this, for he didn't know what the brunette was up to. He could do as he had just been told to, but there was nothing assuring him that it wouldn't backfire. Meanwhile, Izuku walked back to Kaizel, ready to leave and do what he needed. He silently climbed the dragon's back. Igris followed behind him. As he noticed something odd in one of the bushes, he could sense that someone was there, and he could recognize him. It only took him a second to realize who this was. Then he stopped worrying entirely. He just remained as cold as ever and quietly muttered,
"Smile, Judas,"
before ordering Kaizel to take off. As the meeting between Izuku and Shigaraki concluded, the lone Shadow Knight had finally made its way back to the camp. Kodo was still within its embrace, and the quiet savior showed no signs of letting him go. The knight slowed its pace from running to walking as it entered the safe area, until someone came running out of the doors. It was a figure that it recognized, that of Aizawa. The tired teacher scanned his surroundings until he noticed a shadow knight walking closer. He looked visibly shocked by this, as he exclaimed, "What? Why are you here?" with a voice that was just as shocked as his expression. Aizawa had a good reason to be confused by this, because last time he checked, Izuku wasn't at the camp. The knight looked a little confused, tilting his head in response, as another figure came running out of the doors. "Eraser! What's going on?" it shouted, and the knight immediately recognized who it was. It was the homeroom teacher for 1B, Vlad King, and he seemed to be concerned by Aizawa's behavior. Then, as he turned to see the Shadow Knight, he almost jumped into attack, if not for Aizawa, who stopped him while saying, "Stand down, Vlad King! He is not our enemy!" with a stern voice. The Crimson Hero was of course confused by this, for he didn't recognize his dark figure in any way. The two just stared at each other for a short while, long enough for the students present to come see what the commotion was about. The knight had a full view of the students. It wasn't all of them, but he noticed that it was only those who had failed the final exams. "Why are you here?" Aizawa asked once again, snapping the knight back to attention. It looked at the tired teacher, then the students, then back at the teachers. The silence was defeating, and it lasted long enough for Aizawa to realize that the shadow couldn't speak. He was going to say something else at this point, but stopped when he saw that the knight was doing something. It raised one of its hands up to eye level, before snapping its fingers. The teachers didn't notice the effect this had at first, but only a split second after, they could see it all. Out of the shadows of both of them and the students present came more figures, most resembling knights. The students were confused and startled by this, and so was Vlad King. But Aizawa finally understood what was happening. Whether Izuku was present or not, the knights had orders that they were going to fulfill. Those orders were to protect the students in case of an emergency. Aizawa looked at the knight after realizing this without saying a word. The knight remained motionless for a short while, until it nodded in what seemed to be a confirmation. "Eraserhead! What is this?" Vlad King then asked, still demanding answers to what he was seeing. Aizawa knew that he didn't have much time to explain anything, so he just looked at his colleague before saying, "Vlad, you and I will head out to find the other students. We can trust these people," with a calm voice. The Crimson Hero looked shocked at first, but he quickly regained his senses as he said, "Very well then. I don't trust these figures, but I trust you." Aizawa only nodded at this before the two of them took off into the forest. The knights didn't waste any time after this, as they gathered in the building. Kodo was placed back on the floor and gestured to go to the other students, which he did reluctantly. After that, the knights seemed to have a meeting of sorts, but instead of words, they were throwing around hand gestures. "What is happening?" Monoma then asked, looking to be very confused by the entire situation. It wasn't until Kirishima spoke up that some things got clarified. "They can't speak, so they're communicating in the only way they can." With a calm voice, clearly showing that he wasn't at all questioning anything. This confused Monoma even more, but that confusion slowly turned to frustration as he realized that the others were just lax about the situation. "How are you not confused or concerned by this?" Monoma then exclaimed, letting some of the frustration out. The others just brushed him off, as Ashido responded calmly. "These guys have been with us since day one. We have nothing to worry about." Monoma was once again baffled, but didn't get to say anything else until the knights began moving. Two spear-wielding shadows stepped outside, supposedly to guard the entrance, while the others marched into the classroom in a perfectly straight line. They then came out with every bench and chair that was present, before using them to barricade the door. To say that Monoma was baffled would be an understatement. Prior to this, he could only see a bunch of incomprehensible gestures. But now the knights had perfectly executed a plan that seemingly came out of nowhere.
And now we're totally safe,
Ashido was about to add, but was interrupted by a loud banging. Everyone stopped to see what this was, only to notice that it was coming from the previously barricaded door. Another bang could be heard. Then with the third was about to come, the door burst open. All the stacked desks and chairs went flying, so both knight and student had to duck. Luckily none of them were hit, but that was the least of their worries. Standing at the entrance was a massive figure dressed in a cloak. He had blonde hair, a scar that went over one of his eyes, and a sadistic grin. The man had held the two spear-wielding knights in both hands, right before tossing them to the floor. The students didn't recognize him, but Koda did and began to panic, so much so that he couldn't utter a word. The man stared down at the knights, who all stood in formation in front of the students, before he said, "You all look so similar to one another. I can't even tell which one of you ruined my fun earlier." With a sadistic tone, the knights didn't budge, except for the one who had arrived with Koda. He recognized his figure. He was the one that tried to attack the boy at the cliffside. This information made the knight angry, as it and its comrades all prepared to fight. The cloaked villain grinned more widely than before, as he shouted, "Let's see what you go for," before whining his fist back. Ad time. This video is sponsored by Grubhub. With more than 3,000 store locations, Grubhub offers on-demand convenience delivery across the country. You can search for restaurants by cuisine or location. Quickly order food from the menu and track your order from the app. All hassle-free and without any extra charges. Grubhub charges less than other food delivery services, allowing you to get the best value for your money. With Grubhub Plus, you can get free delivery prices for 10 meals every month on orders of $12 or more, for only $9.99 a month. That's not all. You can use the code AFF25 to save 25% off your first mobile order of $15 or more. This code is for a limited time, so again, get 25% off your first mobile order of $15 or more now if you use code AFF25. Check the link in the description. Thank you again to Grubhub for sponsoring this video. Meanwhile, in a different part of the forest, things were getting out of hand. Bakugo and Todoroki had been paired up for the test of courage, and as such were together in the woods. Shortly after Mandalay's distress signal, they ran into Uraraka and Asui, who seemed to be more scared than the others. Everything was going smoothly between the four, despite Bakugo's attitude clashing with anything that the others tried to do, until they got attacked by a villain. This villain was incredibly unstable and hard to deal with, for his teeth extended into massive blades while shooting out in what seemed to be random directions. The teens tried their best to fight back, but there wasn't much they could do. Only two of them, Bakugo and Todoroki, seemed capable of fighting, while the girls tried their best to stay out of harm's way. This proved to be rather difficult, however, for the villain was attacking everything around himself. The girls dodged and weaved as best as they could, but it wasn't good enough. Not long after the battle began, they both slipped and were unable to get up in time. One of the blades came flying at them, and it seemed like the end, until they were suddenly dragged away by some invisible force. The blade hit the ground, leaving both girls speechless for a while. After looking up, they saw the familiar figures of Shadow Knights, making one of them shiver a little while the other was confused.
Why are they here?
Asui asked, her tone being a mixture of confusion and shock. The frog girl didn't get an answer to this question, for both she and Uraraka were once again dragged away without notice. This time it was to avoid a stream of fire. Everyone froze upon seeing this, as they turned to its source. It was Todoroki, showing an expression that none of them could ever hope to describe. It looked like he had been possessed by something foul, something that was very angry and scared. The trees around them were now on fire, as the bicolored teen shouted, "You damned freaks! Why are you here?" with a murderous amount of anger in his voice. The others knew that he was talking about the shadow soldiers. They just didn't know why he had reacted the way he did. Todoroki's expression turned more foul, as he aimed to shoot more fire towards the shadows. It was intercepted, however, when two figures jumped out of his shadow and pulled his arm away from anyone. The flames shot straight up, lighting up the sky as they did. The shadows then attempted to restrain Todoroki. But the teen wasn't having it, as he shouted, "Get off of me!" before surrounding himself in the burst of flames. The shadows were immediately thrown back and crashed into the trees, as Todoroki panted heavily like a maniac. The crazed boy then turned to the two soldiers, aiming his left hand, before preparing to incinerate them both. "Look out, Todoroki!" The panicked voice of Asui cried out, stopping the bicolored teen in his tracks. He then turned to see that the villain was still present, and he had set his gaze on the newly crazed teen. Blades shot towards him, and Todoroki's only response was to create a wall of ice to block it. They stopped, but wouldn't last for long. The blades would break through if he didn't do anything, and when that happened, it would be all over. Todoroki struggled, trying to get out of the situation, but nothing he did worked. He kept fighting back, as he heard something in the distance. He shook it off, thinking that it was his imagination. Then he heard it again, only it was much louder and clearer. He didn't get to properly identify what this weird noise was, for in the next moment a powerful shockwave knocked him off his feet. It wasn't just him either. The other three were also affected, and the villain was thrown back. The bicolored teen tried to push himself off the ground and see what had happened, but he froze when he finally saw what it was. Through the dust he could see a massive figure, one that he thought he could only see in a fairy tale. He had to rub his eyes more than once, but it didn't change anything. What stood in front of him was a massive dragon, clad in jet black scales. Everyone stood frozen upon seeing this, for they didn't know how to process this. Uraraka noticed that the dragon's color was familiar, but she couldn't imagine that it came from where she thought it did. The brunette looked around, hoping to see if the others had made the connection, but something else caught her eye. It was Asui, and she was behaving strangely. Unlike the others, she wasn't just frozen. She trembled uncontrollably and looked like she was about to cry. This worried Uraraka, for she had never seen this type of reaction before. Tsu? Are you okay? The brunette tried to ask, but was cut off when the dragon decided to release a loud bellow. It was aimed directly at the teens, and was so powerful that their hair blew back. They also had to cover their ears, otherwise their eardrums might have popped. The dragon eventually ran out of breath, and the bellow died completely. Once everything was quiet, they all felt shook up in some way, but Asui was much worse. Her knees had failed her, and she fell to the ground. Uraraka immediately ran over to see if she was okay, but there was no response. Asui had fainted. The group remained silent, not taking their eyes off the dragon. It also remained still, until it made an awkward movement. It looked like the beast was kneeling down, but not in the way that one would do to show respect. They all looked confused, as they finally saw what was going on. Standing on the back of this fantastical beast was a man, one that they all recognized. It was Izuku, wearing his usual cold face as he slowly walked down from the dragon's back. He quickly reached the ground. Igor standing just behind him and stared at his classmates. None of them understood why he was there, but they were too baffled to ask that. The biggest thing on their minds right now was the fact that he commanded a giant dragon. They were all silent for a while, until Uraraka muttered, "Deku?" Quietly. The brunette noticed her, but he didn't get to respond before Todoroki began to mutter, "Midoriya." Izuku noticed that too, but he didn't change his expression. He instead looked at the boy and uttered, "What's wrong, Todoroki? You look like you've seen a ghost." With a cold voice, Todoroki lost it after hearing this, as he shot a stream of fire towards Izuku before shouting, "You bastard!" with more anger and bloodthirst than ever before. Izuku was still unaffected, as the flames forked upon reaching him. They didn't hit him. His telekinesis made sure of that. Todoroki was still crazed and prepared to shoot another attack, but was quickly stopped. Out of nowhere came a shadow soldier that resembled Native, and pinned him down, right before another hit him in the head. The bicolored team was knocked out and dropped to the ground, while his Bakugo decided to go on the attack. He was quickly stopped, however, as a shadow that he didn't recognize tackled him. The blondie tried to get back up, only to find that he had been paralyzed. He was going to shout and try something else, but that was also stopped when Izuku kicked him in the head and knocked him out. "Now you'll be quiet for once," the brunette uttered, right before Egress went and picked Bakugo up. Uraraka was in a state of shock. Both Todoroki and Bakugo had been knocked out in less than a minute, and Bakugo was about to be kidnapped as well. Unless she does something, Izuku will get away, and she doesn't know what would happen to Bakugo if that happened. The brunette stood up, ready to tackle the greenette, but she didn't get far before she was grabbed by the hair by the same soldier that had paralyzed Bakugo. This was also the same one that had threatened her earlier, and had held its blade up towards her throat. "Let her go!" Izuku then shouted, startling both the shadow and girl. They both looked at him, only to see that his eyes were filled with anger. The shadow let Uraraka go, then proceeded to join its master's side. Uraraka was on her knees, but she couldn't get up immediately. That's when she shouted, "I will never stop coming for you! One day I will catch you, and will make you answer for what you've done. If you don't want that, I suggest you kill me right now!" With an angry tone, Izuku didn't budge after hearing this. He just looked at her and said, "I won't hurt you. I thought it was obvious by now. Besides, if these two can't stop me, what chance do you have?" With his usual cold voice, Uraraka looked even more angry now as she said, "So, you won't kill me, and I will never give up. What are we supposed to do then?" With the same voice as before. Izuku was just as unfazed as before, as he said, "It's simple. We just won't get in each other's ways. I'm taking Bakugo. You can't do anything about that. What you can do, however, is help those two. I don't think they're gonna make it otherwise," while pointing towards the two unconscious people. Uraraka had almost forgotten about Asui and Todoroki, and only now did she realize the danger they were in. Todoroki had set the nearby trees on fire. If no one dragged him to safety, the flames could spread and hurt them. She knew this, and she knew what she needed to do, but it still felt wrong. "So, I'm just supposed to let you go, and use the excuse that I had to save my classmates?" she asked, sounding more and more frustrated with each word. Izuku responded by saying, "You wanted to be a rescue hero, right? So rescue them," with the same voice as before. Uraraka had no words after this, for there was nothing she could say. She either had to abandon her values, or admit that her enemy was right. Both hurt equally. She had no choice but to stand up and walk to both her unconscious classmates. Meanwhile, Izuku and his men boarded the dragon once more in silence. Uraraka looked up at the grunette, silently swearing to bring him in one day, as the dragon took off. Thank you all for indulging yourselves in all this information thus far. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, there are a few more things that I'd like to go over before the video ends. Firstly, I'd like to thank our patrons: BD Flames, Ethan Davis, Terry Chills, Shifter Meals, Adam Zedgel, Zill, XAVB03, and Joshua Phelps. Secondly, I'd also like to thank all of our YouTube members: Toy Acosta, Rob the King, Sith Lord 906, CF2364, and Knuckles, Remuo Tempest, Angel Juarez, Donald C. Stewart, Brian Greer, and Demonized Fox. Thirdly, if you're in the mood for some great storytelling, We the Celestials has got you covered. Our We the Celestials My Hero Academia and Naruto What If channels retell the story of their namesake anime with a twist. Check it out if you're interested. And fourthly, for those who are keeping track, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in today's excellent content production. Their details can be found in the description below. Lastly, if you're interested in what we do here at We the Celestials, I'd like to extend you an invitation to join our team. The only caveat being is that we only accept members from 16 years old to join our crew. You can sign up for whichever category fulfills your interests by joining the recruitment Discord using the link in the description below. We're always looking for members to join us. Well, that's it from us for today's video. So thank you all for watching, and have a great day.